Here are 30 jazz albums I think you should get, at least 30 artists that are not audiophile pressings. The audiophile thing is great. I love it. I'm immersed in it. Okay, here's my jazz collection. 2 across, 6 down. In fact, this entire top row, those are Music Matters Jazz audiophile collections. I have down here my Tone Poets in a flip bin. I have most of the Tone Poets, so I'm not averse of audiophile pressings, but I think you should enjoy music for the music first. And then, you know, if you have the means and you want the great sound, believe me, I get it. I dive into it quite a bit, but I think some people are losing sight of just buying records because they're theoretically an audiophile pressing. Go for the music first, just my opinion. I'm going to show 30 records from my collection that are, most of them are fairly easy to get for decent prices. If you can't find them at your locals, you know, check, obviously, go to record fairs and locals, go to Discogs, go to eBay. A lot of people, you know, try to charge more, but take your time and look for these. And most of these, I've seen that you can find them relatively, you know, decent prices, depending on your location. But these are all that I love and I highly recommend. So check them out and tell me what you think. So here's 30 albums. And as I said in the beginning, in the little intro showcasing my jazz section, I'm showing 30 great, fantastic jazz albums from my point of view that are not that's a double negative there, that are not audiophile pressings. Everyone's wrapped in the audiophile thing right now, and I applaud that. I think it's great that these albums are being issued in really wonderful pressings, going directly to the master tapes. Having said that, these are different. There's a lot of wonderful records out there you can get at pretty reasonable prices depending on where you live and how you dig, whether they're used record shops, whether they're vintage shops, car boot sales in the UK, or record fairs. Obviously, a lot of sellers now are thinking that every jazz record is worth a lot of money. It ain't quite the case. Go on Discogs, just search out, seek out. Again, this video is not about the specific pressing, because you could go down the rabbit hole there, but to me, enjoy the music. The music should be primary. Not to say that audiophile collectors, myself included, with all the Music Matters Jazz, Tone Poets, love those, but that's not the only music. And I love that a lot of new jazz fans are diving into those Tone Poets and Blue Note Classics and the Verve Acoustic Sound Series and on and on and on and on and on. Those are theoretically trying to match the tapes. These are the way the record came out. Some of these are originals. Some of these are reissues, pressings from the 70s, early 80s, 60s, 50s, and so forth. Some of them repackaged. Enjoy the music. That's what this video is about. 25, actually 30 jazz records for you to enjoy the music. So let's go through it. First one's a comp. I think it's the only collection, various artists is a comp. This came out, I think, in 73, 74 originally. This is an album on Columbia Records, studio recordings, but artists that played at the Apollo, the famous, wonderful, amazing New York Harlem Theater. Fantastic. This crosses over from jazz and R&B, rhythm and blues. It has Bessie Smith. It has Mamie Smith. It has Buck and Bubbles and Their Buckets. I Want a Hot Dog for My Roll from Butterbeans and Susie. It's got Pearl Bailey and Moms Mabley. So it's got some big band, Cab Calloway and his orchestra, Sarah Vaughan and the Jimmy Jones Band. It's got Screamin' Jay Hawkins, I Put a Spell on You, Ella Fitzgerald with Teddy Wilson and his orchestra. Again, Billie Holiday, Count Basie, Slim Gaillard, Ruby Smith, Earl Hines and his orchestra, the great jazz piano player. So somewhat more bluesy, orchestrated in some cases, but stuff you would see if you went to the Apollo during this time. And this is a fantastic collection. I'd say if you see this in a used bin, I know there's a CD issue, which I picked up later on, but this is a record that in our record store days in 74, 75, we would have this on the turntable all the time because a lot of people want vintage and want that old stuff but don't know what to buy. So Stars of the Apollo Theater, love this record and highly recommend it. Mose Allison Sings. I've showcased this on my channel a lot. I believe this is his debut album on Prestige. Great jazz, bluesy, soulful piano player and singer. He's got this kind of hipster vibe, beat poetry vibe, and he's got a really cool thing. Of course, he influenced rock and roller Pete Townsend with The Who, and they covered Parchment Farm and Eyesight to the Blind that he plays on this record. Fantastic record. This is a perfect record to call groovy because it's got that, it's a great groove, it's soulful, bluesy, and a wonderful record. Mose Allison Sings. I pick up everything I run into his records, and they're very inexpensive. Now this next record is a classic, Kenny Burrell and John Coltrane. Beautiful, gorgeous record. Of course, Kenny Burrell, a guitar player, John Coltrane, tenor sax. This is an OJC copy. It wasn't very expensive. I know these are going for more money now, but seek these out. I know there's been some, I think, audiophile pressings, or there are going to be some, but I think you can find this at a relatively reasonable price. Tommy Flanagan piano, Paul Chambers bass, Jimmy Cobb on drums. Fantastic record. More on the moody side of the Coltrane records, not his squeaky soprano side. Love this record, and of course that wonderful artsy photograph on the cover. A record that's amongst my favorite is Chick Corea, Light as a Feather on Polydor. You could also say The Return of the Forever, the first album on ECM with the Seagull. I almost picked that one. I went with this one. This is really great because it's fusion, but it's not the rock and roll fusion that would start happening like in the next year or two in the 70s. I believe this is from 1973, but I think he formed Return of Forever in 72. Of course, it has the great Stanley Clarke on bass, fantastic. And it's got Flora Purim on here as well, a great Brazilian singer. There's vocals on this, and her singing is so great. It's got a Latin flares to it, fusion flares to it, beautifully recorded, and amongst my favorite albums, an early album that I got into in the jazz world. But this is before he got more intense in the fusion thing. But then he retreated back with Spanish Heart, a Spanish jazz sort of fusion album that I quite like, that I've showed recently, double album. That's also great. But this album, Light as a Feather, beautiful songs by Flora Purim, and the great electric piano keyboards of Chick Corea, who we lost last year. There's been so many, John Coltrane records. I'm one that I pick up anytime I see a John Coltrane record. When I worked in the late 70s for ABC Records, got laid off when MCA bought it, then I got rehired for another year, so I worked for both. This was a crossover time. ABC released and reissued a lot of records from Impulse Records. And this is a compilation put together by Michael Kuskuna, who would work with Blue Note later. And this is a really great comp. Originally on ABC Records, obviously, when MCA took them over, they stamped the MCA number. So I got some promos of this at the time as well, because this is when I worked for them. What's great about this really covers sort of 3 records. There's outtakes, alternate versions, and some, I think there's some actual cuts from those albums. But it's got the mellow sound. This is called The Gentle Side of John Coltrane. This was a period of time when he was really crossing over and having some tug of wars with Impulse Records about his, avant-garde leanings, the records that were problematic to some audiences. They wanted him to do more of the standards. That's why he did the album Ballads. Part of Ballads is on here. Part of the collaboration he did with Duke Ellington is on here, as well as Johnny Hartman, a great jazz vocalist. So this is a wonderful comp. I say if you see any of these ABC/MCA twofers that came out in the, I think these are late 70s. This is 1975. I think this was originally issued. But these comps I find are relatively inexpensive for the most part, because people want the actual cover, the actual album, but don't slight these comps, because it's great music and you can take a deep dive into the great John Coltrane, put together by Michael Kuskuna. Wonderful comp. Another one in that same vein is this, Miles Davis. Now, this goes back to 1953, 1954 recordings. Great cover photograph by the wonderful photographer, tempestuous photographer Jim Marshall, who I've showcased on my channel. I knew in San Francisco for, God, 25 years. What a great, great cover of Miles. What a great photograph of Miles. This is a comp from things from, again, 53, 54, that has everyone from Art Blakey to Kenny Clarke, Percy Heath, John Lewis, Thelonious Monk, Max Roach, Sonny Williams. So it's a real mix of recordings and pieces, but the performances are top-notch. It's a kind of a cool overview with some wonderful liner notes here by Conrad Silver, who was a Bay Area jazz critic and jazz writer. Unfortunately, Conrad died at a young age around, I believe, 1979 or so, but was a great young jazz writer. Has things like Walkin', Blue and Boogie on here. So it's that period of Miles Davis from the Prestige years, and this is a twofer. Again, in the 70s, there were a lot of these twofers and series of records that came out, everything from Verve and Prestige and Impulse, that showcase a lot of great work, and they're not always the pure albums, but they're great, great music, and that's when they were started pulling from the vaults a little more too. So again, these are pretty much, I mean, they're all analog before the whole digital realm was happening. So I recommend these. The first wonderful album by the great Bill Evans. Some people, you know, some jazz critics like to kind of think this is, you know, a decent overview intro to a great artist. But I think this is a fantastic record. Orrin Keepnews signed him and produced his first album. Orrin Keepnews was a producer who started Riverside Records and a great musicologist, jazzologist, and someone who just really discovered and promoted a lot of amazing, amazing jazz artists. This is New Conception's Bill Evans, and it's got Teddy Kotick on bass, Paul Motion on drums, recorded in 1956. Fantastic recording, really well recorded, really nice sound. An easy record, obviously has the first version of Waltz for Debbie, which would become a Bill Evans like classic and standard. Love this record, highly recommend it. Probably one of the best jazz live vocal albums ever, ever, ever is Ella in Berlin. Some, like myself, feel, as much as I love her studio records, and I love them, you know, the collaborations, the songbook records, she really shines live. And this record, Ella in Berlin, is also Ella in Hollywood, which is wonderful. But this is the one. This is the one that turned me on to Ella Fitzgerald with How High the Moon and Mac the Knife. The way they kind of rolled into each other, her scatting, beautiful recorded record. One of the greatest jazz vocal albums of all time. If you need one Ella Fitzgerald album, this is the one to get. And you can find these, you know, relatively cheap. This one doesn't get a lot of love compared to Getz and Gilberto. That's the album that everyone should have. And there is a Verve reissue, Acoustic Sounds reissue, but I think they're waiting for a repress. But I see this in the wild occasionally, highly recommended on Verve. This is Jazz Samba Encore, Stan Getz and Luis Bonfa. Luis Bonfa worked on the soundtrack to Black Orpheus, the great film that won the Palme d'Or at 1956, 7 or 8, around that time, which is a fantastic musical cinematic experience. Highly recommended. But Luis Bonfa, great guitar player. This has his wife on here, Maria Toledo, doing some Brazilian vocals. And again, there's a whole series of, four or five records that Stan Getz made in this vein. And this is a fantastic one as well. So don't just get with Getz and Gilberto. Expand your horizons, and wonderful record. I'm a huge fan of bebop, and Dizzy Gillespie is an amazing artist in my book. I was fortunate enough to smoke a joint with Dizzy Gillespie in 1978 in the K-Jazz radio booth at the Monterey Jazz Festival. That's a story I think I've told around here. I'm not going to get into it now. Savoy Records, great jazz label, tempestuous impresario who kind of didn't pay his recording artist very much, or very well. But DG Days, this is really one of my favorites of the comps of that period. And it's just got great, great stuff. Swing Low, Sweet Cadillac, Bopsy Blues, Caravan, a couple versions of Caravan, the great Dizzy Gillespie tune that's been covered by so many artists. Love this collection, love the bright red cover. So if you see this in a store, grab it. It is the older recordings, like what is 1950s, I believe. Let's see, yeah, early 50s, something like that. But Milt Jackson, Percy Heath, Art Blakey, just an incredible group of musicians. And bebop stuff to me is amazing and doesn't get a lot of love or showcase around here on these vinyl community YouTube channels. So I really highly recommend this record. It's just got a great, great groove to it. Funky, soulful, in a different way than 70s funk. Not like that, but just happy jazz record. Love this record. But this is great. Vince Guaraldi, you probably all know because of his score for the Peanuts movie, Christmas, all the Peanut stuff. And what a great piano player. West Coast jazz sound. Again, Vince Guaraldi, Monty Budwig on bass, and Colin Bailey on drums. And this is jazz vocalists, this is sort of jazz impressions of music from Black Orpheus, that whole Brazilian sound that was sweeping the world in a way. But this has a song that became somewhat of a crossover hit. Beautiful instrumental called Cast Your Fate to the Wind that Vince Guaraldi wrote. And it was a huge, huge seller for Fantasy Records. Love this whole record. There's some Samba de Orpheus by Antonius Jobim and Luis Bonfa, things that were written for the actual film score of Black Orpheus. There's Henry Mancini's Moon River. So it's really an easy, beautiful recording. This is cheap when you see it around. I think I have a stereo and a mono version, but I love this record. So grab it. It's a gorgeous record. You don't have to wait for these friggin' overpriced audiophile records. Now, again, going with the twofers. United Artists had a series of these twofers. The twofers, again, were a big part of the 70s. And if you see this whole series, and all the same kind of paper-like covers that are kind of tan, just pick them up. I think there's Fats Navarro, there's a number, there's a whole series of these. Paul Horn was a session musician in LA. Paul Horn had a record called Inside the Taj Mahal, that when I worked in record stores, we sold a shitload of that, very California, because the California, the whole scene of meditation, Eastern ways of introspective, I mean, from the drug scene to the kumbaya meditation scene. Beautiful records. And he's a flautist, saxophone player, but mostly flute. And he did these series of records inside. But Inside the Taj Mahal was probably his most famous because the ambience of the sound of the Taj Mahal, the echoing, very minimal, sparse, you know, burn your incense and have a great time. What this is, this collects a bunch of different, again, instrumental arrangements and ambient type of flute playing with arrangements by Ravi Shankar. Very Indian, a lot of ragas. There's Raga Desh, adapted by Paul Horn. There's several ragas adapted by Ravi Shankar, the great sax player. The great sitar player. And great liner notes by Robert Palmer, one of the great jazz writers and critics. But again, this has a whole series of wonderful collaborations with some Indian musicians, and it's a gorgeous, ethereal, ambient type record. And anything Paul Horn, not in the traditional set of jazz, but I'm trying to cross over here and show you a nice variety of kind of music. It doesn't always have to be friggin' Blue Note records or Verve records. This stuff's amazing. Of course, this is from Blue Note, so what am I? I'm just contradicting myself as I present this music to you. A favorite of mine, Earl Hines, also known as Earl Father Hines. This is a 1966 date, and this is Once Upon a Time. One of the great players. He played in the big band, sort of big band movement, had orchestras back in the 30s, 40s, I believe, in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Ironically, I got into him. I didn't know anything about him until 1974 of Ry Cooder's Paradise and Lunch album. A song called Diddy Wah Diddy, a duet with Earl Hines and Ry Cooder. Ry Cooder sings it. He plays an amazing, amazing piano. It's kind of this great, soulful, jazzy piece of music with him and Ry Cooder on guitar. Fantastic. And I went back. When I was in college, I worked recording with a broadcasting department, did a series of live recordings for KQED, the public broadcasting radio. And I got to meet him from a live performance he did at the College of Marin. So I hung out with Earl Hines as we set up, and what a gentleman, and what an amazing experience for me. This is an Impulse. I don't consider this one of the rare Impulse. I see it a lot, fairly cheap. But I would say this is a great period. If you can get the 60s period, it's not the big band stuff. I just love this. This record has been getting a lot of stuff because of the small batch. This ain't a small batch. I had the small batch and I did an AB with this. Small batch definitely sounds better, but not $65 more better in my opinion. This was a Vinyl Me Please edition. I think there's an OJC edition, so you can get it 30, 35 bucks. But if you see this album, it's a fantastic album by Yusuf Lateef, Eastern Sounds. Cool record. It's got a great, he plays tenor, sax, oboe, and flute. I love the sound of his oboe playing on this record. So it does have an Eastern vibe to it. Fantastic record. Highly recommend this record. I hope they issue just a normal priced reissue of this. If you do, jump all over it. But, you know, the small batch goes for several $100s now. Personally, I think it sounds really good. I'm not going to take that away from it. But again, $100 with the slipcase and stuff, I don't need it. Now, this is a fun album, and I like it a lot because of the cover. This is Charles Lloyd Quartet. Charles Lloyd, again, another flautist. He plays tenor, sax, and flute. Keith Jarrett's on piano. Ron McClure on bass, and Jack DeJohnette on drums. And what was great about this is at the Fillmore Auditorium in San Francisco. Bill Graham did amazing collection of acts in the especially in the late 60s, more than this early 70s. He'd bring in Miles Davis. He'd bring in Aretha Franklin. He'd bring in Charles Lloyd, big band jazz artists, and he would mix them with rock and roll and psychedelic. And of course, look at that groove. Look at Lovin' Charles Lloyd Quartet. I have a mono and stereo of this. I always see this in bins fairly cheap, and it's a great record. They do Here, There, and Everywhere, Lennon McCartney song. There's a Beatle connection. Let's see, they do a couple of songs by Keith Jarrett, and then all original compositions by Charles Lloyd. So, fantastic record. Recorded live at the Fillmore San Francisco. Just has a great ambient sound. Love this record. This record is fantastic. This is Sergio Mendez, Brazil 77, Primal Roots. Now, if you only know Sergio Mendez and Brazil 66, like their kind of bossa nova, a Brazilian South American cover of The Fool on the Hill. They had all those hits with those female singers. That's fun stuff. That's great stuff. This is a diamond in the rough in a way. Again, not taking away from that music. This is the Brazilian sound. It's got an ambient sound. It's got all the instrumentation of Brazil and South America, like flutes and rhythm, and amazing rhythm, an amazing recording. Every time I play this for someone, they buy it. We used to play this again in the Record Factory, the store that I worked in the 70s. We played this and people would buy it. It's not as poppy as those others, but it's very catchy. It's somewhat commercial, but in a gorgeous way. So it's not your normal jazz record. There's vocals on it, female vocals, but it's so good. It's sambas, and this is one of my favorite jazz records, and it does cross over in the jazz pop. A&M Records, you can usually find this cheap. Just order it. If you like what I'm telling you here, if you like my taste, and if you followed me, and you like jazz and pop and a mix of that, I guarantee you, I will not give you your money back, but I think you will like this record. It's Primal Roots. This is 1976, I'm thinking. 75, 76, I don't remember what year it was, but around that time. Fantastic record. Well, 77, Brazil 77. So it's probably 77, although the decades, anyway, 77, 66, 88, 99, I don't know. Another one of my favorites is this. This is the Modern Jazz Quartet with Lorenzo Almeida, the Spanish guitar player, classical Spanish. I wouldn't say he's flamenco, but he's got a really beautiful feel. If you like Sketches of Spain, Miles Davis, you'll love this record. For some reason, MJQ, Modern Jazz Quartet, doesn't get as much love around here either. It's got John Lewis, great piano player. It's got Milt Jackson, great vibe player. You got Connie Kay on drums, Percy Heath on bass. Fantastic record. What a great, is this a Juan Moreau? Oh, Juan Gris painting on the cover, the great Spanish painter. It's classical and jazz, but MJQ gets this kind of easy vibe, prejudice, I think. I pick up MJQ records all the time. They're cheap usually. These are on Atlantic Records. I think they're all fabulous. Liner notes here by the great jazz writer Leonard Feather. Incredible record. Very easy, good Sunday morning record. Another one in that vein, you know, one of my favorite jazz guitarists, Wes Montgomery, again, someone who died too young as well. I could have picked his version of Day in the Life, the Beatles song, but California Dreamin'. Now, he did a bunch of records for CTI, Verve, and this is Verve actually, and then he went to CTI, which are very commercial records. They're all the pop standards. I mean, jazz artists always did standards, but they did sort of the 50s, 60s, the quote classic standards. But people like George Benson and Wes Montgomery and others started doing the pop standards of the day. And his version of California Dreamin', I think this is Creed Taylor produced. Yeah, Creed Taylor produced this, who started CTI. That's Creed Taylor, CTI. The Winds of Barcelona, Sunny, the great Bobby Hebb song is on here, South of the Border. I love this record. Of course, it doesn't hurt for me having the Golden Gate Bridge on the back, but it's got a fun, upbeat California vibe to it. It's a make-you-feel-good record. It's just really a great sounding record. And these CTI, Verve, there's a crossover there, obviously, with Creed Taylor, they're really well recorded. Sometimes some people don't like the arrangements are slick, but I think it's a great record. So going to a whole different direction, and a record that I don't think it's that expensive. And I just got a new copy because I had traded away in my 90s purge, but the solo album, Josepistorius, I think this is his first album. It's very fusion based, incredible bass playing. Of course, he would join Weather Report, and in fact, I have a Weather Report record here. I'm going to show one. This is a fantastic record if you like fusion. You should watch the documentary on him. A fantastic young musician, sort of a tragic ending in a way to his life. And, you know, that's a whole other situation. Now, this record, this is a really interesting record. I bought this because of the cover when this album came out. This is the first album by Oregon. This was on the on Vanguard Records, which was considered more of a folk label. They did rock and roll, obviously, with Country Joe and the Fish, with Sam Charters produced records. And this is their first record. I bought this again because it looked really interesting. I thought the mix of, I didn't know who Ralph Towner was at the time. Now, of course, those of you who follow ECM Records, Ralph Towner, great guitar player. I believe he's from the Pacific Northwest. It's got a mix of classical guitar, tablas, bass, sitar, piano, oboe. This is a lot of great percussion. This is a beautiful ambient instrumental record. Very, in a way, hippie-ish. This is what, 1972? Again, bought this for the cover and the instrumentation. Of course, they would go on to do a lot of records with ECM and other labels, I believe. But I think this is the only record maybe they had for Vanguard Records. It's got Colin Wolcott on sitar. It's got Paul McCandless, who plays oboe and English horn. Really, really organic, really beautiful record. Ethereal to a point, but just the opening song, North Star, written by Ralph Towner. I remember when I got this record, hearing that, and I just knew I was going to love this record. So this is a beautiful, again, a wonderful Sunday morning record. Charlie Parker, Charlie Parker, hands down, probably my favorite jazz musician, the whole bebop. Great sax player, just celebrated his 100th anniversary birthday this past year. Again, this is a Columbia issue. The Columbia stuff, the Verve hologram reissues, the twofers. I will pick up anything by the great Charlie Parker. And these, this is One Night at Birdland. The live stuff's great. The big band is great. Again, those wanting this great audiophile stuff like you get on Tone Poet or Kind of Blue stuff, you're not getting on this, but you're getting great friggin' music. Enjoy the music. You have to have if you care anything about music and you don't have Charlie Parker in your collection, I'm coming after you. I'm coming taking away your records. You don't deserve to have a record collection if you don't have any, especially you don't deserve to have a jazz collection if you don't have any Charlie Parker in your collection. Charlie Parker with strings, just a great bebop artist, an incredible player, Charlie Parker. This record, this is an OJC. OJC were a series, I think, it was a crossover period in the 80s when CDs were coming out, and this is 1988. But they issued these records, and they actually sound really good. I think there may be an audiophile version of this, but this isn't about audiophiles, so just find this record. My favorite of his, although anything, it's a West Coast sax sound, anything by Art Pepper, so you got Red Garland, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones. It's got that great sound of West Coast jazz. Fantastic record. Art Pepper meets the rhythm section. Track this down. Oscar Peterson. I could have pulled a million Oscar Peterson records. I quite like this. Easy record, beautiful cover, Cole Porter songbook. So you got the great Cole Porter standards. He's done things with so many standard albums. Some people just peg him that he's an easy piano player. He's a very melodic jazz piano player. So if you like something that's not so out there, the great Oscar Peterson. Sonny Rollins, there's a whole, again, you can't go wrong with most of Sonny Rollins. This is an OJC also. The Sound of Sonny. It's got some, It Could Happen to You. It's got some standards in here as well. It's got Dear Beloved by Mercer Kern, Hammerson Kern. It's got The Last Time I Saw Paris. Beautiful melodic standards as well. Of course, the whole jazz scene around this time was about standards. What year was this recorded? I think this is the late 50s, 57, 58. Again, it's got Sonny Clark, Percy Heath, Roy Haynes, fantastic. I think it's several sessions, and anything Sonny Rollins, but I quite like this album, The Sound of Sonny, and this was on Riverside originally. Gabor Zabel albums are so cheap. You can find so many of them. Great Hungarian guitar player, had a great sensibility. He's done some fusion, but not fusion in the 70s kind of funk rock fusion. Pop sensibilities. This is 1969, so of course it's got Dear Prudence, Both Sides Now, Walk Away Renee, You Won't See Me, Michael from Mountains, Stormy, I Just Seen a Face. So you got a couple Beatles songs here. And he does, his versions of little bossa nova feel, little European feel of his take on this. He's someone that lived around the Bay Area for a while in the 60s and 70s. I used to see him several times. And just a great, loungy kind of guitar player. Fantastic stuff. Really interesting. I mean, he's done psychedelic kind of crossover. He's done pop. He's, but I pick up a lot of his records because they're easy records and they usually sound fabulous. And this was on Sky Records, 1969, Gabor Zabel. In that same vein, not stylistically, but someone who has a lot of cheap records in the bins, another artist that was in the Bay Area and I'd see quite a bit, a great vibe player, Cal Jader. And Cal Jader, you know, he did a lot of contemporary songs of the day and did great covers. This is a fantastic, this is Cal Jader's greatest hits. An overview, any Cal Jader is fine. This has Soul Sauce on it. You could even get his Soul Sauce album, which I didn't pull for, I'm not quite sure why, but I like this. It's Lucero, Afro Blue, Cubano Chant. So it's got Black Orchid, you know, Latin, Cuban, hybrid, soul, jazz with vibe player. It's got Willie Bobo, Vince Guaraldi on piano. So it's a whole West Coast vibe. It's got Mano Santa Maria on here and Stan Getz and Lonnie Hewitt. And so it's got a really percussive, wonderful, cool Latin jazz vibe. Cal Jader, fantastic artist. I think I've showed this album so many times. It's probably, aside from like Blood, Sweat, and Tears or something, the first album that got me into a jazz when I bought my first my first component stereo in 1972, and they were playing this in store. And the opening song, Speedball, this is Stanley Turrentine with Milt Jackson on vibe, Stanley Turrentine, the great sax player. Slick, but beautiful. Again, Creed Taylor produced, this is CTI Records. But Speedball has this just kind of soulful, upbeat, great opening. I love this stuff. But again, Milt Jackson, the great vibe player from the Modern Jazz Quartet, and Stanley Turrentine. You got Billy Cobham on drums. You got the great Ron Carter on bass. Bob James, piano. Cornell Dupree, who is a great funky kind of crossover R&B guitar player. Great guitar player. Produced by Creed Taylor again. Wonderful record. Wonderful record. I think Pete Turner did a lot of these photographs for the cover of these albums in the 70s, late 60s and 70s. I did mention Jaco before. I'd be remiss if I didn't show a Weather Report. You can get Weather Report records really cheap, I see. I only did this one because it's probably their most commercial. It has the infamous song Birdland that Joe Zawinul wrote, I believe. And there is a vocalized version of this by Mahan Transfer that was somewhat of a hit as well. But this was probably the closest they had to a top hit. Birdland was played everywhere. Another one of those records whenever I used to play it, people used to buy it in the store. Fantastic record. Of course, I think this is the first record Jaco was on, a bass player. Of course, Wayne Shorter is on here, and who was a member also. What a great fusion band. I saw them twice in the 1970s. Friggin' great fedora on the cover, so I gotta like that. Produced by Joe Zawinul and co-produced by Josepistorius, and assistant producer Wayne Shorter. Really great Columbia records. You can pick these up. They're fusion based. I started getting, I think I Sang the Body Electric was the very first Weather Report album I got because of the cover, the robot on the cover, and I just loved it. But anyway, there you go. Now, two more final records, and these are sort of older jazz artists in terms of most of the records I've shown, aside from Charlie Parker. But one of my favorite sax players also is Ben Webster. Very reedy, beautiful, intimate sound. Very soothing record. This is a series I've done several features on. These were Verve Records 2 record sets that came out from 1976 to about 82. All illustrated covers. They're fantastic. Almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all of them are cut by Robert Ludwig, so they sound great. But again, they're older recordings, anywhere from the 40s, 50s, some into the 60s, and a whole selection of different musicians on these and different songs from different records, including some outtakes like Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins, Herb Ellis on guitar, Ray Brown on bass, Alvin Stoller on drums. There's a mix of different musicians on some of these. And my other favorite, Pork Pie Hat. The Pork Pie Hat Man. Of course, I pick an album where he's not wearing a pork pie hat, but Lester Young usually always wore a pork pie hat. Another great sax player, another great from that Verve series. And this has a Again, 2-record set with Lester Young, John Lewis on piano from MJQ, who would go on to form MJQ. Buddy Rich is on here, Nat Cole is on here, Nat King Cole. Fantastic. Any of these records you can find anywhere, depending on, for $10 to $20, and they're all double records. And I find whenever I see these, they're usually in great, great, great shape. People didn't play them for a lot. I'm not quite sure why, because I think I have every single one. I bought this whole collection when I ever seen them. I got a lot of them during the day back in the 70s, late 70s, but the ones that I missed or I got rid of over the years, I picked up in the last 10 years. Fantastic records. So these are 30 jazz records that I think everyone should own, or at least these artists, if not these exact titles, that are not over the priced, crazy priced audiophile pressings. Although, you know, enjoy your tone poets, enjoy your Blue Note classics, but ultimately go for the music first. That's what I say. And again, I show that other stuff too, and I love that other stuff, but it's about the music first. Don't buy it just because it sounds good on your stereo. That's my opinion. Mazzy loves you.